Mr. Speaker and members, what this bill does is it penalizes localities, cities, mostly urban cities, for a homelessness problem that exists within our cities that we don't want. As the author of this bill said, nobody wants people living on the streets. But during the interim, I came to find out something that I think you would find very interesting. You see, I represent this part of Austin, and there is a church, St. David's Episcopal Church, and they have a wonderful homelessness ministry. I am friends with the woman who runs that. Her name is Andy Brower. Some of you may know her. And she asked me, can I come and meet with you with some of these people who are living on the streets in Austin? And I said, of course, come. She filled my office with all these people living on the streets. And I heard their story. And there was this one gentleman sitting so close to me, and he said, the thing is, I was brought here to Austin by the state of Texas. I have no connection to Austin, but the Department of Criminal Justice brought me to a halfway house on the east side of Austin. And then when I was paroled out, I was just here in Austin. I know nobody. I have no job. I have no family. I have no where to live. And by the way, I have no way to get the medication I need for my mental health problems. And by the way, you want me on my medication because the reason I ended up incarcerated is because I was not on my medication. He said, and many of us living on the streets come from that halfway house in East Austin. So that piqued my interest. And I went and I visited what is known as a transition center. It's the Austin Transition Center. It is a 421 person bed on the east side of Austin. I went and I started asking questions. It is run by a private prison corporation by the name of Core Civic. They have another operation in Dallas, another operation in Fort Worth, El Paso, and Corpus Christi. And what I learned was that of the entire population there in 2024, 1,371 people there, just 8% were from my county. Just 8% were from Travis County. The rest were brought to my county by the state of Texas, by TDCJ. When I met with the woman who runs the program, she said, oh, I am sure that many of the people who are living on the streets here in Austin come from this location because they get let out. We try to have a 100% employment rate. I asked, what is your employment rate? It was under 20%, and they count day labor as employment. The state is letting people out of the system. These are former offenders, formerly incarcerated people, into
Mr.
our
Speaker,
community.
the gentlelady yield for questions.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Let me just finish this point.
Absolutely.
Not at this time.
Into our community with no resources, no connection to anyone, and they are out here to fend for themselves in our city, and then we are blamed, like the author of this bill is doing, we are blamed for our homelessness problem in Austin when it is the state of Texas who is in large part creating a problem, because that is what happens when you don't have a safety net. We don't have a safety net. We're not bleeding libs, that's why we have a safety net. We have safety nets because it keeps our communities safe, right? I had one person once tell me, I want your kid to get an education, not because I care so much about your kid, but because I don't want your kid robbing my house. That's what happens when we don't give people the help that they need to get back on their feet when they come out of the system. We throw them into a community they have no connection to, and they end up living on the street. So what this amendment says is that you should not penalize the city for the problem when it is caused by an offender, a former offender who is living in your city, who did not come from your city, who was brought here by the state of Texas. And that is my amendment, and yes, I will answer your question.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Canales, for what
will the
purpose?
gentlelady yield for questions?
Yes.
The lady yields.
So I'm listening to your story, and so we, during an interim hearing in the time I've been in the legislature, did you know that cities play homeless wars? Meaning they round up their homeless, give them $100 and ship them to Corpus Christi. Or they round up their homeless and give them $100 and ship them to other cities. Are you aware that cities play homeless wars with each other?
I had never heard that before.
Well, they
I actually
do because it
represent
came out in the
Canales.
testimony. And so what you're talking about is not only a TDCJ problem, is that cities, major cities, give homeless people $100 and a bus ticket and ship them to other cities. And so I'd just like this body to know that those are some of the facts that what we're living with in the state of Texas is some of the largest municipalities play games with each other to ship each other homeless. And instead of solving this problem, we're penalizing people.
Absolutely. And in fact, what we learned in this investigation into what this is all about is that the largest percentage of people we have in this transition center in the East Austin actually come from Bexar County, where they don't have a transition center because that community was able, through zoning and fighting, able to not have that in their county. So this is in large part a state-created problem, and what I'm saying is don't make our cities pay for it when you're creating it. If the problem and if the population you're dealing with is more than half of people who are not from your locality but were formerly incarcerated and brought to your city by TDCJ, then the city should not have to give up its tax receipts, its sales tax receipts, because it's being punished for something that is the state's fault. That is the amendment. It's a matter of basic fairness, and I hope the author of the bill will support this amendment, and I move adoption.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the lady yield for questions?
The
I
lady
do.
yield for questions. The lady yields.
Yes.
Representative Hinojosa,
Yes.
would it be fair to say that especially people who have just left prison, that they don't have any ability to take care of themselves if they don't have a job, they don't have a home, they don't have their medicine, they're not going to be able to take care of themselves, right?
That's right.
And it's not a matter of, well, why don't you just go somewhere else? They have nowhere to go. They have no ability to go anywhere.
That's right. And in fact, I asked the question, does TDCJ have to offer them a ride back to where they came from? And the answer is no.
So for all intents and purposes, if someone spent the last 10, 15 years in prison and they're just dumped off in Austin, they're essentially stuck in Austin.
They are. Yes,
Right.
they are. And our city really has invested so much to solve this problem, but it is very expensive. Austin spends upwards of $4,000 per person, $4,000 per person to provide temporary transitional housing for Texans. But for Texans who require more permanent housing, it's about $15,000 to $20,000 a year per person experiencing homelessness. And the thing is that if we have this spigot of this from the state of formerly incarcerated people being just left in our community with no ties to the community, we will never solve the problem of homelessness.
And
in
these
Austin.
people, these former incarcerated people, they have families somewhere else. They have homes somewhere else that they might be able to go to, but because they're left here, they don't have the ability to go back to where their loved ones are, where there's family support for them, and so they become a burden on the city.
Right. When you've hit rock bottom, you need family, you need friends, you need a support network to get back on your feet. When you are dropped off in the middle of a community that is foreign to you, you can't have that help that you need. You don't often have that help that you need because you don't know anybody. And so, yes, people end up living on the streets in desperation, and it is very tragic, very sad, and Austin is doing everything we can, and cities all over this state
Ladies,
are
time
doing
has expired.
everything they can, but need some help. I move it.
The chair recognizes Mr. Capriglione in opposition.